1 year after his surgery, Max's symptoms returned with a vengeance. A seizure, worse than any before, left him disoriented for hours. The follow-up scan confirmed Jackson's fears. The tumor had returned more aggressively, wrapping around areas too delicate for surgical intervention. "We can try another round of radiation," Dr. Matsuda offered, her eyes kind but realistic. But the side effects would be significant. Quality of life would be compromised. Jackson stood by the examination table, one hand resting on Max's head. "How long without treatment?" 3 weeks, maybe a month." Jackson nodded, the decision already made. "Then we make them count." That evening, he sat on his porch swing with Max beside him, the dog's head heavy on his thigh. He opened a new notebook, the kind he'd once used for mission planning, and wrote at the top, "Max's bucket list." For hours, he listed experiences a dog might treasure, crossing off the impossible ones, meeting a dinosaur, keeping the ambitious but feasible ones, feeling the ocean. Diane's documentary crew, which had been filming periodic updates, arrived the next morning to find Jackson loading camping gear into his truck. "We're going off script," he informed them, helping Max into the passenger seat where a custom harness secured him safely. "Keep up if you want the real story." What followed became legendary first in their town, and later, nationwide. Jackson approached each item on Max's bucket list with the same precision he'd once applied to military operations. When a national park denied entry to dogs, he made calls to former military contacts until permission was granted. When Max tired too quickly, Jackson carried him on specially designed backpack carriers. The list became their mission. A helicopter ride over the Grand Canyon, Max wearing custom doggy earmuffs, his ears flapping in delight. Surfing lessons in California, with Max secured to Jackson's back, both of them tumbling into the waves. A dignified dinner at a 5-star restaurant that changed its no pets policy for one night only, Max wearing a bow tie. A visit to a fire station where Max was made honorary fire dog, complete with miniature helmet. Meeting with the shelter workers who had first cared for him, including a tearful reunion with Elena. Social media followed their journey, the hashtag #MaxBucketList trending nationally. Children sent hand-drawn additions to the list. Veterans with service dogs organized a parade in Max's honor, the procession stretching 7 blocks. On their last morning together, Jackson carried Max to watch the sunrise from their favorite hilltop. The documentary crew kept a respectful distance, capturing the silhouette of man and dog against the dawning sky. No microphones recorded their final conversation, but viewers would later see Jackson press his forehead against Max's, their breath mingling in the cool morning air. As golden light bathed them both, Max peacefully slipped away, his final moments filled with the warmth of the sun and the embrace of the human who had become his world. The documentary film, titled Stay, The Story of Max and the Marine, premiered 6 months later at an independent film festival, winning the Audience Choice Award before being picked up by a major streaming service. In the film's final scene, Jackson is shown welcoming a new rescue, a 3-legged pit bull scheduled for euthanasia, into the home where memories of Max lingered in every corner. "Brain tumor," Dr. Matsuda said, pointing to the scan illuminated on the screen. "Likely present since birth, but growing now. That explains the seizures." She glanced at Jackson, whose weathered face remained impassive. "Treatment options exist, but they're expensive. Thousands of dollars, with no guarantee." Jackson nodded once, his military-bearing automatic even in civilian clothes. "What are his chances with treatment?" "Maybe 50-50. Without it." She let the sentence hang unfinished. "Do everything," Jackson said firmly. 3 hours later, he emptied his modest savings account without hesitation, then created a social media post that would unexpectedly go viral, a photo of Max, head bandaged after the preliminary biopsy, with the caption, "This dog never gave up. Neither will I #SaveMax." By morning, the post had been shared 17,000 times. Local news picked up the story, the retired Marine and the death row shelter dog. Donations poured in, enough to cover Max's specialized radiation treatment at the veterinary university 2 hours away. As Max recovered from the initial surgery, Jackson converted his screened porch into a rehabilitation space. He built a ramp over the 3 steps leading outside, lined the floor with soft blankets, and installed a baby gate. His neighbors watched with curiosity. Jackson had kept to himself since returning from his final tour, declining block party invitations and limiting conversations to curt nods. "The dog needs regulated temperature," he explained gruffly when Mrs. Abernathy from next door brought over a casserole, clearly angling for a look inside. What he didn't say was how the nightmares that had haunted him for years, visions of fallen comrades and split-second decisions with permanent consequences, had unexpectedly diminished since Max's arrival. When documentary filmmaker Diane Rees contacted him about featuring their story in her series on animal rescue, Jackson initially refused. "We're not a spectacle," he told her curtly. But Max's medical expenses continued mounting, and the platform offered a chance to raise awareness about shelter animals with special needs. "Fine," he finally agreed. "But this is about the dog, not me." Diane nodded, but her experienced eye recognized the real story: 2 damaged souls healing each other. The documentary captured their daily routine. Physical therapy exercises Jackson had adapted from his own military rehabilitation, the careful measuring of medications, the gradual strengthening of trust between them. Max's seizures decreased, but his back legs remained weak from neurological damage. Undeterred, Jackson crafted a makeshift wheelchair from old bicycle parts and adjustable PVC pipes. "Engineering was my specialty before I enlisted," he explained to the camera, the first personal detail he'd willingly offered. Each morning, neighbors would see them tackling a slightly longer route. Max's determination matching his owner's military discipline. Children began to wait along their path, cheering when they passed. An elderly veteran 3 blocks over would stand at attention and salute, an honor Jackson acknowledged with a sullen nod. The documentary captured their breakthrough moment on a crisp autumn morning. Max, spotting a squirrel darting across their path, suddenly stood without support for 3 full seconds before collapsing into Jackson's waiting arms. The filmmaker caught Jackson's face in that moment, a smile breaking through like sunlight after storm clouds, transforming his hardened features completely. That night, for the first time since returning from overseas, Jackson slept through until dawn, no screams waking him, no cold sweats soaking his sheets. When he opened his eyes, Max's head rested on his chest, amber eyes watching him with what could only be described as devotion. Eleanor Mercer, a 24-year-old shelter worker still paying off veterinary school loans, almost missed the golden shape huddled by the entrance. The early morning light was dim, filtered through clouds that promised more rain, and she was running late after her ancient Honda refused to start on the first 3 attempts. Fumbling with her keys at the shelter's side door, a faint whimper caught her attention. Approaching cautiously, she discovered Max, soaked, mud-caked, and shivering violently, the pink ribbon on his ear a jarring splash of color against his misery. "Oh my God," she whispered, dropping her coffee thermos as she rushed to him. When she reached to untie him, he didn't growl or cower. Instead, he licked her hand, his trust somehow intact despite everything. The rope had cut into his neck, leaving a raw ring that would later scar. Elena's eyes welled with tears as she noticed the Forever Love tag glinting mockingly in the morning light. "Some forever," she muttered, her gentle hands working quickly to free him. Max stood on wobbling legs, his tail offering a single weak wag that broke her heart more thoroughly than his pitiful appearance. Elena had seen hundreds of abandoned animals in her 3 years at the shelter, but something about this one, his dignity perhaps, or the absolute faith in his amber eyes, struck her differently. Inside the overcrowded shelter, reality set in. The weekend had brought 5 new surrenders and a litter of puppies found in a dumpster. Every kennel was full, and Director Simmons made no attempt to hide his frustration at the addition of a large adult dog. "Medical assessment, then Kennel 17, he said dismissively. "The pit mix there is being adopted this afternoon." Elena bit back her argument. Kennel 17 was the smallest space, tucked in the back corner where potential adopters rarely ventured. But at least it was something. Max followed her obediently through the cacophony of barks and whines, pressing against her leg whenever another dog lunged at the kennel gate. The shelter's part-time veterinarian diagnosed malnutrition, mild hypothermia, and a respiratory infection beginning to take hold in Max's lungs. "Start him on antibiotics," Dr. Patel said, handing Elena a bottle of pills, "and document that ear infection. We'll need to justify the medication costs to Simmons." Max's gentle nature became his downfall in the shelter environment. While other dogs barked and jumped to attract visitors, Max watched silently from his kennel, becoming increasingly invisible as days turned to weeks. Elena started arriving early to walk him before her shift, drawn to his quiet resilience and the way he leaned gratefully against her legs during their brief time outside. One bright Tuesday afternoon, a family with 2 young children approached his cage, the first potential adopters to show interest in nearly a month. The father, a tall man with kind eyes, reached for the information card, and Max's tail thumped against the concrete floor, his first sign of hope. Elena, restocking supplies nearby, held her breath. "Too big," the father muttered, glancing at their modest sedan parked outside. "And these medical issues." He shook his head, moving on to the next kennel where a border collie puppy yacked excitedly. Elena watched Max's posture sink, as if he somehow understood the exchange. That night, shelter workers found Max's food untouched, his water bowl overturned. The antibiotics had helped his physical condition, but something else was failing, something intangible but vital. For the first time since his arrival, he turned his face to the wall when Elena approached with the evening medication. "Please don't give up," she whispered, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor beside his kennel. "The right person is coming, I promise." But as she said it, her eyes drifted to the euthanasia list on the clipboard hanging nearby. Max had been at the shelter for 30 days now. Policy stated that after 45, difficult-to-place animals would be evaluated for space considerations. It was shelter euphemism for a death sentence, and they both knew it. For the first time that night, Max joined the evening chorus of howls that echoed through the building long after the lights went out. Max, a 2-year-old golden retriever with unusual amber eyes that seemed to reflect the sunset, trembled as the familiar SUV sped away, leaving nothing but dust clouds and betrayal. The collar around his neck still held the engraved heart that read, "Forever loved," a cruel irony as he remained tied to a lamppost outside the rural shelter that wouldn't open until morning. The approaching thunderstorm sent other animals scurrying for shelter, but Max stayed rooted, certain his family would realize their mistake and return. A passing truck splashed muddy water across his golden coat, but still he waited, his loyalty unwavering even as lightning split the sky. Max's life had changed drastically in the span of just 2 weeks. He remembered the hushed arguments that had begun shortly after the newborn came home from the hospital, the baby's constant wheezing whenever Max entered the room, the mother's tearful phone calls to doctors, the father's increasingly frustrated glances in his direction. Max had tried everything, staying in his bed, keeping his distance from the small, fragile human that smelled like powder and milk. He'd even stopped bringing his toys into the living room, somehow understanding that his presence alone was causing distress. The rain began to fall in earnest now, fat droplets that quickly soaked through his dense fur to the skin. Max whined softly, tugging slightly at the fraying rope that secured him to the post. He hadn't eaten since morning, when the man had given him half a hot dog, a rare treat that, in retrospect, had been a final meal of sorts. The memory of the woman's face as she kissed his muzzle one last time haunted him. She had been crying, her tears wetting his fur much like the rain did now. The little girl, only 4 years old, had been told Max was going to a farm where he could run free. She had tied her favorite ribbon around his ear that morning. It was still there, a bright pink streak against his golden fur, now drooping in the downpour. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, followed by an immediate crack of thunder that made Max cower. The shelter building loomed dark and silent, its windows like empty eyes staring at his predicament. The parking lot had emptied hours ago, the last staff member locking up without noticing the dog tied to the far lamp post. Max had tried barking earlier, but his voice had grown hoarse, and now he merely whimpered occasionally, more from confusion than fear. The hours passed with excruciating slowness. By midnight, the storm had intensified, and Max was shivering uncontrollably. The rope frayed further against the metal post. Freedom was just one tug away, but Max wouldn't break the final command his owner had given him. Stay. That word had always been followed by praise, by a treat, by affection. So he stayed, even as the temperature dropped and his empty stomach cramped with hunger. Somewhere around 2 a.m., headlights swept across the parking lot. Max's head lifted, hope momentarily brightening his exhausted eyes. The car slowed, then stopped. A figure peered through the rain at the bedraggled dog. For one heartbreaking moment, Max's tail wagged weakly, a reflexive response to the possibility of rescue. But the car soon drove away, the driver unwilling to get involved in whatever sad story had led to this scene. As dawn approached, Max finally lay down on the wet asphalt, his legs no longer able to support him. The rain had stopped, but a bone-deep chill had settled into his body. His once magnificent coat lay flat and dull against his increasingly prominent ribs. Still, his amber eyes remained fixed on the road where the SUV had disappeared, his canine heart unable to comprehend that sometimes love wasn't forever after all. 3 months into Max's stay, budget cuts forced the shelter to mark several long-term residents for euthanasia. The morning Max's name appeared on the list, Elena called in sick for the first time in 2 years. She couldn't bear to be the one to lead him to that final room. Instead, she sat in her car in the parking lot, sobbing into her hands, cursing a system that had failed this gentle soul and her own powerlessness to change it. Inside the shelter, the day proceeded with grim efficiency. 2 senior cats and an aggressive terrier had already been processed. Max was scheduled for 2 p.m., after the lunch rush of potential adopters had come and gone. One last courtesy chance at a miracle. At 1:37 p.m., an unlikely visitor arrived. Jackson Wheeler, a gruff, recently retired Marine with PTSD, who volunteered walking the difficult dogs twice monthly, pushed through the shelter doors. At 52, his face was weathered like old leather, deep lines carved by desert sun and unspeakable memories. The volunteer coordinator brightened at his arrival. Jackson had a way with the problem cases that no one else could match. "Got anything challenging for me today, Susan?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. Susan hesitated. "Actually, Jackson, we're short-staffed. Would you mind walking some of the quieter ones? Kennel Block C needs attention." Jackson nodded, taking the leashes she offered. He preferred the difficult cases, the biters, the lungers, the fear-aggressive ones that reminded him of himself when he first returned home. Their chaos matched his internal landscape. The quiet dogs required a gentleness he wasn't sure he possessed anymore. In Block C, Jackson methodically worked through the kennels until he paused at the second-to-last one. Something in the golden retriever's resigned posture struck him. Unlike the other dogs who barked or wagged, this one simply lay with his head on his paws, amber eyes following Jackson's movements with exhausted indifference. "What's your story, soldier?" Jackson murmured, checking the card. "Max, day of execution, huh?" He recognized the red mark on the card. He'd seen the same on his own military paperwork when his unit was scheduled for particularly dangerous missions. Against protocol, Jackson opened the cage and sat on the floor beside Max, who didn't rise or approach. After several minutes of silence, Max finally exhaled deeply and crawled forward, resting his head on the man's lap. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of matching wounds carried beneath the surface. As Jackson clipped on the leash and led Max outside, Susan approached with a sympathetic expression. "He's on the list for today, Jack. Don't get attached." Jackson nodded curtly, but his jaw tightened. In the exercise yard, Max moved stiffly, showing little interest in his surroundings until suddenly, he froze, his body going rigid before collapsing to the ground in violent seizure. Without hesitation, Jackson scooped up the 60-pound dog, ignoring the strain on his bad knee. "Which vet?" He barked at the startled volunteer coordinator. "Valley Animal Hospital, but we don't have approval for." Jackson was already striding toward his truck, Max's convulsing body cradled against his chest. "Bill me," he called over his shoulder, settling the dog gently on the passenger seat. As he drove, one hand remained on Max's heaving side. "Stay with me, buddy," he muttered, running a red light as Max's seizure continued. "That's an order." 2 miles later, Jackson carried Max through the doors of Valley Animal Hospital, the dog now terrifyingly still in his arms. "Help him," he demanded of the startled receptionist, his military authority brooking no argument. "Whatever it costs."